Hello and welcome to Literature Party. In this video, we are going to look into The Stone by Wilfrid Wilson Gibson. Well, if you are writing SSCE between 2026 to 2030, you would be needing this poem. So it is very important for you to understand what this poem is all about. So what is this poem all about? Well, The Stone by Wilfrid Wilson Gibson is a narrative poem that explores the shattering impact of unexpected death and the silent psychological ruin of grief. It tells the heartbreaking story of a young woman whose lover is killed in a quarry accident when a rock falls on him. So the narrator visits her home to break the news, only to find that someone else has already told her. Consequently, the shock has left her emotionally frozen, as if turned to stone. She doesn't cry, move, or speak for days. But on the fourth day, she comes to the narrator and quietly asks him to cut a gravestone for her dead lover. So as he carves the stone, she silently watches him night after night, never speaking, never showing emotion, only staring with eyes full of deep, silent grief. So her stillness and presence disturb the narrator deeply, but he keeps walking. When the gravestone is finished, she finally breathes her lover's name, leaves his house, and never returns. So moved by pain, the narrator then begins to carve a second stone, this time around for her. So structurally, this poem has a 97 line and it reads like a short story. It is divided into 11 stanzas and it is written in free verse form with no fixed stanza pattern. So this is what the poem is all about. And the first stanza of the poem, it begins in media res. And in literature, when we say something begin in media res, it means it begins in the middle. Ordinarily, talking about plot structure, you have at the beginning, middle, and the end. But this one begins in the middle, then takes us back to the beginning, then to the middle again, and finally the conclusion. And it begins with the bereaved lover asking the narrator to carve a stone for her dead lover. You have it in, and will you cut a stone for him to set above his head? And will you cut a stone for him, a stone for him? She said. So she's making this plea. She's making this plea to the narrator to carve a stone for her dead lover. So that is what we have in the first stanza of the poem, and it's a good example of a rhetorical question. So the first one, we have two rhetorical questions therein. Then the narrator takes us to what informs these two questions. So he takes us to the very beginning, to the accident at the quarry where the dead woman's lover is crushed to death by a stone. So you have that in the second stanza of the poem. 3 days before, a splintered rock had struck her lover dead, had struck him in the quarry dead, where careless of a warning call, he loitered while the shot was fired. A lively stripling, brave and tall, and sure of all is at the side. A flash, a shock, a rumbling fall, and broken beneath the broken rock. A lifeless heap with face of clay, and still as any stone he lay, with eyes that saw the end of all. So in this stanza, we are taking back to the very beginning. So this stanza recounts the tragic accident that befell our lover. 3 days earlier, our lover was killed by a falling rock in a quarry where he works. He had ignored the warning and lingered before he was crushed in an instant. So his death is even made more jarring by the fact that he was a lively stripling, brave and tall. He was a very young man, full of youthful exuberance and enthusiasm. He was just snapped out of a life like that. It was an abrupt end to a young life. So the language in this stanza mimics the suddenness and violence of his death. So you have a flash, a shock, a rumbling fall. That's a good example of onomatopoeia. Rumbling, rumble. So then you have the constant repetition of had struck our lover dead, had struck him in the quarry dead. So basically, we in this part we have a good example of parallelism, and you will find that in the poem. This poem is characterized by the use of parallelism, and the poet uses this for emphatic effect to show the level of intensity of an incident, or the level of emotional intensity. Yes, the emotional intensity of the actor. So that's what we have in this stanza. Then a lively stripling, brave and tall. That is a good example of metaphor too. You have a good example of metaphor. Then unbroken beneath the broken rock. So you have a play upon words. A broken rock breaks breaks the person. So the person, the dead man becomes broken by a dead rock. So that's a good example of a pun. A lifeless heap with face of clay, and still as any stone he lay. So that's a good example of a similitude with eyes that saw the end of all. So that's basically what stanza 2 is all about. So we are going to move on to stanza 3 of the poem. So in stanza 3 of the poem, the speaker decides to go and break the news to the woman. He decides to go and break the tragic news to the dead man's lover. But before he could get there, someone else has done that. Someone he calls some poor fool had sped before, and flinging wide at her father's door, had blotted out the news to her. So some poor fool had broken the news to her before he could get there. And the bluntness, the way he bluntly broke the news, it has actually emotionally impacted or affected this woman. She has become emotionally paralyzed. She has become emotionally frozen as a result of this breaking of news. You can see that in had struck her lover dead for her, had struck the girl's heart dead in her, had struck lifeless at a word. So it's saying that it is not even the news of her lover's death has killed her as well. The blunt, with its bluntness and all that, it has killed the girl as well. So she has become frozen as a result of the way, not necessarily the news alone, but the way the news was broken. It was broken to her. It has killed her spirit as surely as the same way the rock has killed her lover. And the messenger, he left, not knowing or let's say unaware of the damage he has done. So this stanza basically shows the emotional aftermath of the accident, of the tragic accident we have in the previous stanza, in stanza 2. So, and talking about the figures of speech, we have the use of dysphemism in some poor fool. So the narrator's choice of the expression some poor fool, it's a way of berating the person for his emotional insensitivity. Someone's lover has just died, and you just come around and say and break the news. Your lover has died. Your lover has been crushed. You don't break it that way. So you have to break it in a way that, in fact, you have to set the stage for the breaking of the news. You placate the person. You play with them, you tell them soothing words before you, not just go in there and say it as if you are making a declarative statement. He's dead. Your lover is dead. No, it doesn't work that way. So that's a good use of dysphemism. Then we have a parallelism, like I said earlier on. Parallelism is this poem is characterized by parallelism. You will find it throughout the poem. Had blotted out the news to her, had struck her lover dead for her, had struck the girl's heart dead in her. So these are examples of parallelism. They have the same grammatical structure. And then had struck lifeless at a word. It's a good example of hyperbole too. You can't strike life with just dead with just a word. So then Oridon is witless way. You have a good example of alliteration too. You have wa in the initial position of both words. I think that's for that. Then we move on to the next stanza. That's stanza 4. And when I came, she stood alone, a woman turned to stone. And though no word at all she said, I knew that all was known. So in stanza 4, when the speaker arrives, when the narrator comes around, he finds that the woman is alone and unmoving, that she's emotionally frozen by grief. Immediately he knows that someone has broken the news to her, that she's already aware of the tragic incidents at the quarry. So, and we are given that a picture of a woman numbed, whose grief has been numbed and immobilized, who has been emotionally displaced, who has been emotionally paralyzed by loss. Then you have that comparison. She's compared to a stone. We understand that a stone is lifeless, a stone is motionless, a stone is expressionless, a stone is emotionless. So the narrator transfers all these attributes of a stone to the woman, that she's as good as a stone that killed her lover. So it shows that it actually shows the poem's recurring stone imagery. Then we move on to the next stanza. So this stanza it just reinforces. That's a stanza 5. It just reinforces the woman's emotional petrification, the woman's emotional paralysis, the extent of emotional paralysis. That's what this stanza does. So because her heart was dead, she did not sigh nor mourn. It means she's expressionless. She does not show any form of emotion. She does not show any form of grief. His mother wept. The mother to the dead man, she weeps at the loss of her child, at the loss of her son. But his lover could not weep. Her lover slept. She could not sleep. 3 days, 3 nights, she did not stir. It means she's motionless. 3 days, 3 nights were one to her. It means that she has lost the track of time. Who never closed her eyes from sunset to sunrise, from dawn to evening fall. So her tearless, staring eyes that seeing not saw. So she does not see anything. She does not see anything. Her capacity to feel, to respond, or engage with the world around her has been shut down. As you can find in her heart was dead. And even this last 2 lines, the penultimate one and the final line of this stanza, are tearless, staring eyes that seeing not saw all. So it's a good example of paradox. It is saying basically that she can see, her eyes does not see anything, yet it can see everything. So which means she's only staring. She does not see anything. Whatever is in her mind is way beyond her environment. She's unable to engage with her immediate environment. Though her eyes are open, but she can't engage with the realities of our immediate environment. Then again, we have parallelism too, from sunset to sunrise, from dawn to evening fall. So you have a parallelism too. You have the use of prepositional phrases. So that's a parallelism too. Then 3 days, 3 nights, 3 days, 3 nights. You can call it repetition, but it also functions as a refrain here too. Then you have antithesis too. She did not. Okay, let's see. His mother wept, she could not weep. That's antithesis. So it is placing two contrasting ideas. So it is saying basically that people around her, even the mother to the deceased, she cries, she weeps, but the lover, the woman here does not weep. So it places two. Then again, our lover slept. Our lover slept. That's the use of porn. The use of porn. Our lover slept. So it is. Can we say porn? Yes, it is porn because she's the narrator is playing upon the word sleep. The first slept means sleeping in death. Yes, death. The second sleep means normal sleeping, normal rest. So Alova slept. She could not sleep. You have the use of porn there. You have the use of euphemism there to slept. I think he slept there is it's a better way of saying it's a better way or a pleasant way of saying a lover is dead. Then she could not sleep. So that's antithesis. The two lines taken together, that's an antithesis. Then we also have a parallelism too, because if you look at it, his mother wept, she could not weep. They have the same grammatical structure. His mother is the subject, wept is the predicator. She could not, she is the subject, could not is the predicate, could not weep is the predicator. Our lover slept. Our lover is the subject, slept is the predicator. She is the subject, could not sleep is the predicator. So that's how the thing is there. Then from songs, I think I've explained all that already. So it actually shows further how emotionally paralyzed by grief this woman is. This is what we have in this stanza of the poem, stanza 5. Let's move on to stanza 6. So in stanza 6, the woman goes from being motionless. Ordinarily she did not move, she does not do anything and all that. But in stanza 6, she decides to go out. So she goes to the narrator's house to ask him to cut a stone, a gravestone for her dead lover. So it marks a shift from passivity to action. That's on the fourth night. And you can see now that the poem is now back in the present moment. The narrative is now back in the present moment. It is now back where it actually started. So we have the use of rhetorical question, and will you cut a stone for him? That's a request. So afterwards, she sits down, stares at him with emotionless but intensely piercing eyes. So, and the speaker finds her look or gaze, he finds it unsettling. It unsettles him. It unsettles him. You have that in those eyes, those still gray eyes that followed me, those eyes that plucked the heart from me, those eyes that sucked the breath from me and cuddled the warm blood in me, those eyes that caught me to the bone and caught my marrow like cold steel. So she is uncomfortable. Is unsettled by her gray eyes. For someone who does not show any form of emotion, we can equate gaze to something ghostly. Then unseen stare, the expression unseen stare, it echoes what we have in the previous stanza, where it is stated that she can see everything around her, yet she can't see anything. So then again, we have the use of parallelism to those still gray eyes that followed me. It's a noun phrase. The following one, so those eyes that plucked the heart from me, it's also a noun phrase. Those eyes that sucked the breath from me, noun phrase. Those eyes that caught me to the bone, that's also a noun phrase. So they all have the same grammatical structure and they have the same grammatical pattern. You see that followed me, which is an adjectival phrase. That plucked the heart from me, an adjectival phrase. That sucked the breath from me, an adjectival phrase. That cut me to the bone, an adjectival phrase. All qualifying the head word, which is eyes. Which is eyes. There. So, and then you have the use of simile to and cut my marrow like cold steel. That's the use of simile. That's the use of simile there. So, and we can see our grief, the emotional toll of our presence, the emotional toll it has on the speaker. How our grief affects others physically. How our grief affects others physically. So we'll move on to the next stanza, which is stanza 7. We'll move on to stanza 7. So in stanza 7, the speaker he obliges our request, he complies to our request, and he begins to cut a stone. He begins to cut a smooth and square stone for the dead man. So he begins carving the grave stone. So, and the woman, she sits by him. She sits beside him every night and watches as he walks. So he describes nightly presence as so still and white. And he also says she comes like a ghost every night, sitting on her chair and all that. So basically what we have in this stanza is that notion that this person, she is no longer part of life. She hovers in a liminal state. So she's in between mourning and death. She's in between money and death. She's neither here nor there. She's in between money and death. But she's no longer of this world. She's no longer of this life. She's only here physically. Her spirit is gone. Her spirit is dead. Her spirit is broken. So that is what we have in this stanza. That is what we have in this stanza. So, and of course, night after night by candlelight, night after night, so still and white. So that's also parallelism to its parallelism because they have the same grammatical structure. We have simile too, and like a ghost she came. Like a ghost she came. That's a simile. And what other figures of speech do we have beside me in our chair? So short stone, smooth square. That's a alliteration too. That's alliteration. So these are some of the things you would find there. You won't find in this stanza of the poem. That's a stanza 7 of the poem. Then let's move on to the next stanza, which is stanza 8 of the poem. So in stanza 8 of the poem, the woman is shown as deeply invested in the engraving process. So she's fixated on the process. She eyed each stroke. She silently watches every strike of the chisel, barely moving or speaking. So, and her silence and stillness here intensifies the psychological weight of the scene. Not a sound or murmur broke. So the only sound we are privy to is a mallet stroke, which is actually mechanical and ritualistic. So that's what we have in this stanza. Grief is carved. The speaker carves a grief into the stone. He carves a grief into the stone, stroke by stroke. So let's move on to the next stanza. That's a stanza 9. Stanza 9. So in stanza 9, the woman continues to silently watch the speaker's hands as he walks, with eyes that seem to burn his hands. So her eyes is so intense. Yes, her stare is so intense. It feels as if it burns him. You have that in this line: my wincing, overwearied hands. So it feels as if she's transferring her grief to him. So it's actually reflective of the emotional strain on him. The woman is just there watching him with cold, expressionless eyes. Then in line 87 rather, it says, death caught still deeper in her heart. So each blow of the chisel seems to deepen the wound in her heart. It seems to deepen the wound in her heart. You have that death caught still deeper in her heart, which means as he's chiseling into the stone, he implies that death is also chiseling into her heart. So basically, while the stone is his own working object, so he implies that while the stone is his own chiseling object, for death, our heart is actually the chiseling object. So as he cuts into the stone, death also cuts into our heart. So that's basically what we have here. So the speaker realizes that the stone carving is a mirror to her inner suffering. So she's actually suffering as the woman, as the man is chiseling into the stone. And she's losing every shred of herself. She's losing every shred of her as the man cuts into the stone. And then we have a good example of apostrophe here. Yes, apostrophe. We have a good example of apostrophe here. So when the speaker says the two of us, implying a death, it makes it seem as if death is actually a physical entity present, or doing the chiseling with him. So that's a good example of apostrophe too. Then in the expression death cut still deeper in her heart, that's also a good example of a personification too. Here is a personifying death, and you should note, for example, that the D, the initial letter, D, which is the initial letter in a death, it is written in capital letter to show that here it is not just death here is a nominal figure. It's a nominal figure. So that's what we have here. You have personification, and then of course you have apostrophe. You have apostrophe here. So he personifies death as if he's a partner in the chiseling process. So while he carves the stone, death carves a soul. Death chisels into a heart. So that's for stanza 9. Then we have a good example of synecdoche here, my wincing of a wearied ant. Wincing of a wearied ant. It says, so with this wincing of a wearied ant, it's actually a part of a whole. It represents the whole being. Yes, it represents the whole being. It represents the speaker's tiredness or fatigue, if you call it that. So that's a good example of synecdoche there. Okay, so we move on to the next stanza, which is the penultimate stanza. That's stanza 10. Stanza 10. That's the penultimate stanza. Then in stanza 10, the speaker finishes carving into the gravestone. So he completes the job, and he lays his mallet by. The woman breathes her lover's dead name with a sigh and quietly leaves, and she never returns. So, and symbolically, the completion of the stone symbolizes the closure of a grieving ritual. A soft sigh is in the same vein, the only vocal expression of emotion she offers throughout the poem. And when I say throughout the poem, I mean after the question she asked the man. So it's the only vocal expression of emotion in the poem. So once the job is done, she leaves the speaker's house, and then we have the last stanza, which is the last stanza. In the last stanza, that's stanza 11, you have just 2 lines, and the speaker says, "Next night I labored late alone to cut her name upon the stone." So basically now the speaker stays up the next night alone, carving her name into the same stone. So this final couplet implies, rather than states directly through the use of understatement, that the woman has died. Ordinarily, in soul and spirit, the woman is dead. Right from the very moment she add the insensitive breaking of her lover's death, the news of her lover's death. So she's dead in soul. She's already dead in soul and spirit. But here the speaker is implying that the woman is dead both physically and in spirit. So the quiet sudden shift in "to cut her name upon the stone" in line 97 is devastating in its simplicity. It says either or both of two things. One is that the woman is, as implied, is dead, either physically or emotionally. The latter has been depicted copiously in the poem and could be a reason for the carver to cut her name upon the stone. Two is that her soul-killing grief has transformed the carver from a witness to someone else's loss to a mourner himself. So we can say that he's also mourning the woman's psychological and emotional paralysis or emotional death. So that is basically what stanza 11 is all about. So that is what the poem is all about. And in reading the poem, or let's say in skimming through the poem, I would say skimming anyway. In skimming through the poem, we've already talked about the use of metaphor. We've talked about the use of similitude, still as any stone it lay, and like a ghost she came, caught my marrow like cold steel. So we've already talked about that. Then we talked about personification too. We talked about personification, and then we talked about repetition. Even here, that the first stanza, you have an instance of repetition. And will you cut a stone for him? And will you cut a stone for him? So that's repetition too. We've talked about repetition too. Then enjambment. So enjambment is when a line runs into another line. That's what enjambment is, and it is here 3 days before a splintered rock had struck a lover dead. So that's enjambment for you. So a sentence running into lines and all that. So we have onomatopoeia. That's, you find that under rumbling fall. You have onomatopoeia too. Then you have antithesis. I've explained that too. Then paradox. We've talked about that too. Then to the tone and mood of the poem. So to the tone and mood of the poem. So the mood of the poem is actually still suffocating grief, while the tone is quiet and emotionally restrained. So Gibson elects silence, tone, and the slow walk of morning speaker volumes. So I'm talking about the title of the poem. We can say the stone. The stone here is symbolic in a number of ways. We can say that the stone represents the tragic accident at the quarry where the lover is struck to death or crushed to death by a stone. And we can also look at it from the perspective of the woman too, how she becomes emotionless, how she becomes still, how she becomes emotionally paralyzed, how she shows no form of life and all that. So that is we can see the stone in this context is referring to the woman. So that is what we have for the significance of the title of the poem. And talking about the themes in the poem, we have a lot of them. You have emotional paralysis. I think emotional paralysis is actually very evident in the poem. It's one of the, should I say, discernible themes in the poem. So emotional paralysis, we see how the woman is emotionally paralyzed. So she's in a state in which overwhelming grief renders her incapable of normal emotional response. So after the sudden death of her lover, the young woman becomes emotionally immobilized. We've seen that in fact, the narrator in his own description, he compares her to a stone. And this metaphor captures both her inner numbness and outward stillness. So that's emotional paralysis. Then another theme in the text is the theme of sudden death. And this is echoed in stanza 2 of the poem. You can see the suddenness of the speaker's death. Did I say the speaker? No. The lover's death, the man's death, how he died in his prime, how he died in his youthful, as in his youth and all that. We see that theme of sudden death. So, unexpected death. You see that how he's crushed to death by a stone. So that's how the theme of sudden death manifests in the poem. Then we see the theme of transformation. Yes, there is a theme of transformation also in the poem, and it actually shows how grief can transform anything it touches. So, and the most striking transformation in the poem is that of the bereaved woman, who is depicted as a woman turned to stone. So it is saying basically that the stone, the incident, the tragic incident, has transformed the woman emotionally. So that's where the theme of a transformation comes in, and the narrator too is transformed, because by the end of the cutting of the stone and all that, cutting the lover's name into the stone and all that, he becomes emotionally transformed too. So he becomes emotionally transformed. So he undergoes a powerful change. We witness that in the poem. He's emotionally transformed too. So that's how the theme of a transform. Then we have the theme of grief. All through the poem, we witness grief. Everything all through the poem, there is a grief. We see how the woman's reaction or actions and inactions towards grief, how she responds to grief. We see that in the poem. Then what other? The theme of death. The theme of death as a persistent presence. So all through the poem, death is a persistent presence. All through the poem, you will witness that during the lover's sudden death, and then of course during the chiseling of the lover's name into a stone. Death, that's ambient. So let's say that aura of death is still very much around. How it has numbed the woman's feelings, how it has numbed a whole lot of things. So it is also there. So these are some of the themes in the poem. Then we have a whole lot of themes in the text. So in the comment section, you can identify the themes I have not mentioned and the figures of speech I did not talk about. Thank you.